Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala khatam al-anbiya wa sayyid al-mursalin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله رب العالمين اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فسحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه ونعوذ بك من شره بشر ما فيه بشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا وأرضنا يا رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah. Today we want to speak about some things related to the topic of virtue ethics, even though we've already completed the two texts which were assigned starting in the fall of last year. One text written by a Moroccan scholar by the name of Abdullah ibn Asha, and the second text written by a scholar from Egypt who was from the school of Imam Shafi'i. In both of those particular texts, we took the sections related to what is called tasawwuf, which I have chosen to translate as virtue ethics. And so today, I wanted to begin by summarizing some of these ideas that we've studied, and then I wanted to follow that up by discussing what have traditionally been referred to as the deadly sins, or the 7 deadly sins in the Christian tradition, and then follow that up with some particular observations about this particular list of deadly sins or mortal sins from the Islamic perspective. Thank you. Right, so what we've been studying is an extremely important science during these particular times. There are a lot of challenges that we have in the current age because of the existence of so many types of philosophies, and in particular, philosophies which basically make it difficult for us to have any or make any sort of concrete judgments about anything, because the definitions of the human being have become a bit more variegated. This particular conception of the human being in the pre-modern world, and in particular in the Islamic and the Christian or Judaic tradition, is built upon the assumption that human beings have a fundamental nature. And secondly, that their nature is sometimes inclines towards vice and sometimes inclines towards virtue, but ultimately the purpose for which God created the human being is to flourish and to be happy. And of course, being happy doesn't simply mean happy as we understand it today, as to being the opposite of being sad, even though on one level it is the same thing as sadness, because sadness in the pre-modern sense had a different connotation as well, other than what we understand it today. That is to say that human beings are here to perfect their humanity. So even though we are born in this world incomplete in our humanity, that our lives are about growing into full perfection. So the assumption or the premise we begin with is that the human being has a fundamental nature. And the human being, secondly, the human being is psychosomatic, that is to say that we're both flesh and spirit, that the acts of the spirit influences the acts or the state of the flesh, and the state of the flesh or the acts of the flesh can influence the state of the spirit. And the flesh and the spirit, in one sense, we can also view them as the difference between the fact that we have intellective powers and we have sensitive powers within the human being. The ancient Greeks, they defined the human being as a hayawan al-natiq, or the way the Arabs expressed it or translated this, al-hayawan al-natiq, as the the rational animal or the articulate animal. So the human being is fundamentally a rational being, and then also on the other side, the human being is an animalistic or has an animalistic nature. We share the animalistic nature with other animals on the planet. We share the intellective aspect of our nature with the angels, since the angels are completely rational. They are not influenced by the flesh or their desires, whereas the lower animals, you can look upon them as less rational or more ruled by their appetites and their desires. So the human being is a complex of both of them. And the aim is for us to, for mind to gain mastery over matter, that the intellect gains mastery over one's appetites. And so that is fundamentally what the ultimate goal is in this life. And so we are able to better gain mastery over our appetites by learning through pursuing knowledge, by increasing our understanding of ourselves, understanding of the world around us, understanding of so many different things. And as we increase in knowledge, hopefully we will increase in our ability to suppress our desires, or at least control them, and not to remove desire. That the aim is not to get rid of desire. The aim is not to get rid of lust, or the aim is not to get rid of anger, or get rid of pride. That's not what the aim is. Rather, pride and anger and lust, all of these things that we have are considered to be part of our nature, and so the aim is not to erase our nature, rather is to better control them and not allow for them to lead us into dangerous and harmful territory. That's fundamentally what it's all about. So the human being, when we look at the powers of the soul has been divided into these two aspects: the soul, the intellective powers, and the sensitive powers. The sensitive powers further break down into the concupiscible sort of desire and irascible desire. Concupiscible desire is fundamentally what typically we talk about when we think of lust. Irascible desire relates to things such as, like, for instance, anger originates from irascibility within the human being. So we respond to things in our environment, and there are certain attractions that do exist within the person. On the other side is the intellective power, which is what we typically refer to as the will. To reason. And so the aim of reason is to seek truth and to establish a connection with reality, whereas the will, our sensitive powers, is to determine or to follow or pursue our good, as you would say. At any rate, that is largely what we've dealt with. But then the most important part of this is to understand the difference between an act and what we call a virtue or a vice. That the journey of spiritual improvement or spiritual refinement or behavioral refinement, if you want to call it that, it begins by learning the commandments of God. That's where it starts. We learn God's commandments and His prohibitions. And then the second step is to internalize those commandments. Doing something one time, you don't internalize it. It's something oftentimes feels a bit awkward to begin with. When people first become Muslim, for instance, they're told you, if you want to pray, you have to perform wudu. So, and some people, they feel strange, sniffing water up their nose. It's not normal for them to do that. Some people, if they've been involved with certain types of drugs, perhaps they're used to doing things like that. But water is, for some people, somewhat of a very awkward type of act, But but the more you do it, eventually, it can be said that you have internalized the commandments of God, or you normalize them in your life. And then, after that, then you increase in virtue. The aim is to increase in virtue. And so virtue fundamentally is an expression of a certain type of disposition that one develops through the habit of doing the acts on a regular basis. So if, let's say if I struggle with dishonesty or falsehood in general, that I make a decision that I'm going to struggle against telling lies, right? So after a certain period of time, if I've gotten accustomed to telling the truth, then that becomes more normal for me. And so it becomes my first impulse. So when someone asks me a question that I don't automatically think of telling a lie, I think automatically to tell the truth. So once that occurs, I have acquired a virtue, right? I've acquired a virtue because of that. And that's an example of it. The opposite is the same. So the vice, if you think of a falsehood, so if you're accustomed to telling the truth and then you're placed into a situation, then now you have to lie. Let's say if you become like a CIA agent or somebody like that, right? Or a spy, right? And you're undercover, or you're a police officer in general, that people develop the tendency to lie, and they have to lie until it becomes normal, and people don't feel any sense of guilt about it. And perhaps even your first impulse every time someone asks you a question is to tell a lie. And when that occurs and it becomes a sort of a second nature within you, then we say that actually, we call it a vice, right? So we believe once you remove the barriers or these vices from our psyche, from our nature, then we open ourselves up to taking in the divine light much easier. Because as one scholar defined sin, he defined it as al-hajbu anillah. It is to be barred or veiled from God. That is what is sin. To do something when you do a sin, it's fundamentally, it is a veil from God. And so as you overcome sin, and you overcome vice, then those veils are removed, and so the light of God shines through. So this is fundamentally the understanding that these pre-modern people had, and we ourselves, we take pride in appropriating these ideas from the pre-modern period. So when it comes to the question of what have been referred to as the 7 deadly sins, in Arabic you probably would say the muhlikat, the destructive behaviors that we find in the Christian tradition. There are 7 listed. Of course, there are others, but these are considered to be the most serious of all of them. 4 of them pertain to the sensitive appetites. 3 of them pertain to the intellective appetites. The first 4 are lust, gluttony, greed, and sloth. And the other 3 are wrath, envy, and pride. Now, lust, being a sensitive type of, originating from the sensitive powers of the human being, it also has, there is a way to regulate lust. And it's been offered as in contradistinction to the vices or these particular sins that they're called. Because realistically, these are examples of vices, even though they're not, they call them sins, but they're really vices. Meaning that a person who's lustful, right, it's not like, for instance, I smack you in the face and then it's gone, you have the desire for something, you just have it, right? Person wants to sleep with another person, right? Lust, right? It's there with you until you can get rid of it somehow. Or at least, if you don't get rid of it, at least you can manage it and don't allow for it to push you to the extreme of becoming involved in fornication, adultery, among other things. Right, so lust has an opposite, or it has a particular virtue by which it is regulated. Lust relates to the loins. They call it lust, a desire of the loins. All right. So what particular virtue you think would be utilized to manage lust? Or at least is what do the Catholics say about this, or the Christians say about this? You manage lust with? Well, temperance could be, a word we utilize in this way as well. But chastity is a word often utilized to express the virtue, which is utilized to regulate lust. It doesn't remove lust necessarily, but at least it does it through chastity, through the inculcation of the virtue of chastity. The person is better able to manage their lust. Gluttony is another vice of the sensitive powers. And gluttony pertains to the stomach. Right, so there's a desire of the stomach. Just gotta have that cheeseburger. Oh man, it looks good, right? So whatever it may be, I love the way that food tastes. I know it's gonna hurt me, but I'm gonna eat it anyway, right? Gluttony is a desire of the stomach, pertaining to the stomach, and it should be managed with temperance. Or temperance oftentimes is utilized to refer to it's like chastity for the loins, and then so temperance usually for the stomach. So a person practices self-restraint, practices discipline, self-discipline, self-mastery. And so through that, and we already know that temperance is one of the cardinal virtues. So if a person is challenged by his or her stomach, then temperance is the virtue which is extremely important for them to develop. And so if we go back to what we had studied before, we talked about how, that the path of the journey begins with repentance, and then repentance, in order for repentance to occur, that it requires fear. And in order for fear to really have a place in one's heart, then one has to, what the true sign of fear is that one has what we call zuhd, or a certain type of asceticism is practiced, in that one abandons certain worldly indulgences. And so temperance develops through that process. Returning to God, fear, and you inculcate fear by understanding the gravity of one's actions, understanding what I will lose if I do this or I don't do this, and if I understand that, you go, okay, hey, well, take that salt, you're going to have a heart attack. Okay, well, I have to withdraw. I have to remove salt from my diet, right? So this is zuhd, right? This is a type of indifference or asceticism that I take, which is a true sign of khawf, of fear. Why I don't eat salt? Because I was told if I eat salt, then I'm going to lose my life, right? So that's what that looks like. So gluttony is of the stomach, lust is of the loins. Greed is a desire which pertains to wealth, or pertains to one's desire for wealth. And what's interesting about the three of these is that one leads to the other. And we're actually going to read a passage from Imam al-Ghazali, where he actually talks about this, how the stomach, when lust, that gluttony leads to lust, and then lust leads to the pursuit of wealth, and then wealth leads to pursuit of status, and then once you have status, then all the other vices, they clash with one another, beside oneself. Pride, envy, resentment, all those things come thereafter. So greed pertains to the desire for wealth. So when one wants wealth, pursues wealth too ardently, it can become a vice, and you respond to greed with what? What's the virtue that you combat greed with? Charity, exactly. Charity. If I'm greedy, meaning I want to keep everything for myself, then I learn to give away, right? I show love to others, right? Through giving them gifts. And actually, there's a hadith of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tahadu, tahabu, exchange gifts, exchange love. And also, jubilatil qulubu ala hubbi man ahsana ilayha, that hearts should dispose to love those who show goodness towards them, show goodwill to them. Right? So lust of the loins, gluttony of the stomach, greed of as pertains to wealth, and then finally sloth. Sloth is the word, the translation of the Greek word acedia, which actually can be defined as a type of a spiritual sadness. A spiritual sadness. And so sadness being the opposite of happiness, you have to understand that sadness in its classical connotation fundamentally meant a certain type of weariness, or sort of laziness, lack of of zeal about a thing. So if you're happy, then you're not weary. You actually are motivated to do good things, right, and to work and be diligent, right? So sloth, and we know there's an animal called the sloth, right? You can say because it moves so slow, right? But sloth, when they speak about sloth, they're not just talking about, just sloth in terms of like, I don't want to go get a job. This is not what these virtual ethicists were concerned with. They're talking about spiritual laziness, spiritual sadness. This is when a person doesn't really you don't feel motivated to do the things that are most useful and beneficial for yourself, right? Right. I don't feel like, I don't want to pray. I don't really get it. Pray for what? Give charity for what? Fast for what? Do good things for people for what? It's just, your himma is daniya, right? Your himma, your zeal is sort of connected with base or lowly things. It's not himma aliyah. It's not a sort of a sublime or high type of zeal or ambition that one would have. And so when a person is slothful, it means that you are suffering from spiritual sadness. You're suffering from spiritual laziness, I guess you could say as well. So which means that if that is the case, then the way that you regulate sloth is with what? What do you think they would say if that's what it means? So if spiritual sadness is about one sort of feeling sort of weary or sort of lethargic or even phlegmatic about life, about spiritual pursuits, then diligence will be the virtue. To do diligence, it will be the opposite. And so basically we think of slothfulness as relates to rest, right? So we want to gratify our loins. We want to gratify our loins, gratify our stomachs. We want wealth, and we love rest, right? Of all time, so rest with relationship to everyday, quotidian, mundane types of issues. But we also don't like to have burdens placed upon us in the spiritual realm. Why? 5 times a day. Say, why can't I just pray to God the way I want to? Yeah, you can, but it all depends on just how you see it. So those are the sensitive, those that originate from the sensitive appetite. So these are considered to be what are referred to as deadly sins. But then when we come to the intellective powers, those that originate from the intellective powers, the 3 of them, one is wrath, and then envy and pride. So wrath, we know wrath, right? Right. So what's the difference between anger and wrath? Right. One's manageable, one's not. Well, wrath is manageable according to this teaching. It's like you can manage wrath. But how do you manage wrath? What are you going to say? Yeah. What were you saying? One is actual? In what sense? What do you mean it's actual? Yeah, it's either about to, materialize or is on the verge of materializing, right? So wrath, right? So anger. All of us get anger. Anger is natural. If anything, if you don't have any anger, then you're not human, right? Because again, that we don't believe that not to be angry is a good thing. Right? Actually, that's a bad thing. Sometimes you need to be angry. Otherwise, there'll be injustice everywhere. There would never be justice anywhere, if we never got angry. We get angry and we see injustice. And when we see it, when we get disrespected, when we feel demeaned and debased, we get angry. That's a good type of anger. It's all about how you react to your anger, how you act on your anger. That's why when the companion came to the Prophet and asked him, he says, give me some advice. He said, don't get angry. And he said, okay, give me some more advice. He said, don't get angry. Well, give me some advice, more advice. He said, don't get angry. Right? Meaning, don't act on your anger. Doesn't mean this. He was telling him that it's bad to be angry, but he's telling him don't act on your anger. Don't allow for your anger to lead you to do things that are destructive, that are inappropriate. Yeah. So if that is the case, if wrath is when now it becomes something that transcends yourself to others, then how would you think, or what particular virtue is important in order to manage anger? Manage anger, what? What do you do? I mean, if I'm telling you, don't act when you're angry, then you do what? You hold back, you restrain yourself. Patience. Patience is the opposite of wrath. Right? People would think, what do you think like would be the opposite of wrath typically? Or say, without wrath, you have wrath or you have mercy. People, a lot of times people say, mercy, wrath, mercy. Show mercy is a person of wrath. Rather, the opposite is patience, or the virtue which is meant to regulate it is patience, or restraint, self-restraint. So I know I want to do that. I would like to hurt you, but then I think of the consequences. And I think of, is it just or unjust? And this is an important thing to highlight too when we think about the three fundamental emotions of the human being, that any human being has them from the time they're born. And there are three fundamental emotions. One is desire, then the other is fear, and the other is anger. Babies get angry, they're fearful, and then they desire. They want to eat, right? They want to eat, or they want to drink milk, whatever, however they've been raised. Right? So three fundamental desires. So anger, when it turns into wrath, becomes a vice, it has to be managed by a particular virtue. And so typically we say that anger is managed by justice, but wrath is managed by patience, right? It's because anger, again, is a step before wrath, right? So if I understand what justice means, then I would never be led into wrath. But if I'm already there, then patience or restraint will keep me from committing my own injustice. Because I may be reacting to an injustice, then I commit a new injustice. So, and this is an important science for today. I mean, you can see like the type of reactions on the world stage, with people, and people feel, and people are oftentimes they're in states where they're oppressed, but then the reaction becomes extreme, and they justify. They're looking for a self-sanction, right? They try to find a way, type of theory to justify, well, they killed our kids, and we'll just kill theirs too, right? It's justice, right? They'll convince themselves that that's just, right? I mean, our kids didn't do anything. Okay, well, see how they feel if they to lose their kids too, right? Or it could be something just like, okay, well, I know Islam says suicide is wrong, but there's a particular goal we have in mind here. This want to strike fear into the enemies, or we would like to, this is the only means that we have at our disposal. We don't have tanks and airplanes and all type of things. That goes below. Hey, you understand? If people did more deliberating on things like this, or if it was possible for them to do so, because oftentimes what happens when you're in these very adverse situations, it's difficult to think. It's difficult to imagine that people would be able to restrain themselves or be able to think clearly as well. That's why we need peace in order to have. So you have peace, then you can educate people, you can talk to them about these type of things, But if there is no peace, then you run the risk of people being radicalized easily and taking on someone's philosophy, some other type of education, and for them at that moment, it makes sense to them. And we don't know how God would judge those type of people. Some people do a lot of very, very bad things, but we don't know ultimately how God will judge them. Because maybe God will look at the person's heart and see the person is sincere, but just simply misguided, just didn't know any better. But the conditions on the ground led them to do certain things. And I'm not just trying to justify anything, but this is something we need to consider. But it's extremely important for people to have some type of ethical reasoning involved in their lives, which actually has the right type of definitions and the right type of balance. So wrath is one of those things. Envy is another one. So envy, remember, is to desire that God remove a blessing from another person, or to not give a blessing to another person. Or it could be, I want God to remove the blessing from that person and give it to me. And beauties, wealth, it could be status, it could be knowledge, right? And fundamentally, what you're saying is that you're saying of God that, well, you made a mistake when you gave that person that thing. And you should have given it to me. Or I have this thing, and because of I'm special, that other person shouldn't have it. So envy is that. And it's an act of it's a type of mean-spiritedness that people have with them. So what's the virtue you manage that with? If you're mean-spirited, then you manage that with which virtue? So if you're envious, then what do? You show kindness to people. Kindness. That becomes the way that you manage it. Regulate it with kindness. Right? So if I'm envious of you and I feel that I'm jealous of something that you have, I actually do the opposite of what my nafs, my ego, tells me to do. My ego tells me to hate you or be in competition with you, put you down, or say, you know what? I'll be kind, show kindness to you, in hopes God will remove the envy from our heart. Pride is the last one. So pride, we all know pride. Pride, is for you to look down upon other people. And pride is easy. You handle it with humility, right? Right. So pride fundamentally is to see yourself as above, over others. Humility is the opposite, to come down. Even in the Arabic language, it comes out clearly. Takabbur and tawada'. Takabbara, right, to become big, right? Istakbara is the extreme form of it, where it says that Satan was overtaken by extreme arrogance. Istakbara wa kana ma kana min sajidin. Ababa istakbara, right? He effused and he became pursed up with pride. So that was Satan. So the person they humiliate themselves, or they humble themselves. So humility becomes a way of managing that, reminding yourself again, just like in the case of envy, that if this person has this position, there must be some wisdom in it. God placed this person in this situation. There must be some wisdom behind it, even if I don't understand the wisdom. Sometimes you're put in situations where, there's simply a test. Some people in better situations than others, and it may be that God knows if I did not allow for you to be, for instance, rich, then you would reject faith in God. And some people He keeps them poor. Keep some people poor for that reason. Some people He makes them rich because He knows that if He allowed them to be poor, that they would reject faith. So that's one way that God actually He protects people. All right, so other than this, when we come, these are the seven, considered to be the seven deadly sins: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. And in our tradition, we have certain archetypes which are considered to be representative of what we call the four cardinal virtues. And the four cardinal virtues are what? Who remembers? The cardinal virtues? Nobody remembers? Well, courage is one of them. Courage, wisdom, temperance. It came up before when we talked about anger. Right? Remember, we talked about anger. You manage anger with this wrath. Wrath with patience and justice, right? So courage, wisdom, and we're talking about practical wisdom. We're not just talking about somebody who can say what Aristotle said, or this is not type of wisdom that this is talking about. This is talking about situational wisdom. People who actually they're able to make the right type of judgment calls in situations. So wisdom becomes a virtue. So justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. To show you like an example of what courage is, like when we look at in our tradition we have what's called the four rightly guided Khulifaa, four rightly guided successors of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, or in particular, the Khulifaa al-Rashidoon, the four rightly guided caliphs. And in one sense, you can look at the four of them as representative. Each one of them represents one of the cardinal virtues, right? Abu Bakr al-Saddiq would be representative of courage. For instance, Abu Bakr, though many of us may have heard stories about Abu Bakr, about how gentle of a person he was, he would pray. An example, when the Prophet got sick and he prayed, he led the people in prayer. He said he spoke in a low voice. Umar ibn Khattab, he recited in a louder voice. But Abu Bakr at the same time showed great courage and wisdom as well. But like you can say that he's a very courageous person, because you think of his life. Abu Bakr, prior to Islam, he was actually one of the elite Meccans. He was part of the elite. He's a rich man. He actually was responsible for paying ransom for captives and freeing the captives. And so that particular virtue of his carried over into Islam. We know that there are a number of people who he set free from slavery as well after he became a Muslim. So the fact that he would follow the Prophet with this new message, in spite of the very fact that it challenged the orthodox theology of Mecca at the time, and understanding the type of trouble that would cause, right? That he understanding that he would have to give up his position of status, that he would give up his wealth potentially, right? That is one of the most courageous acts that anyone can actually make, because courage is not just simply not having fear and sort of just challenging danger, facing danger without fear. If anything, that's actually an extreme. That's what we call a vice. It's called recklessness, or called foolhardiness. That's a vice, when one just simply, I'm plunged into dangerous territory with no fear. Man, I don't care, I'm just going to walk down the street. I know there may be some people shooting down there. I'm just going to walk down there anyway because I'm not afraid. A bullet doesn't care. You understand? It's like just called foolhardiness. And an example of foolhardiness, I guess you could say, probably would be the state that Umar ibn Khattab was in when he first accepted Islam. So, for instance, it said that right after he accepted Islam in his sister's house, and then he goes and gives shahada to the Prophet. Well, in the house with the Prophet, he goes straight down to Mecca and announces right in front of the Kaaba that I have just accepted Islam, and anybody wants to duke it out, come down, And then he's fighting. He's just fighting all of these men in Mecca. And of course, they get the upper hand on him because there's a lot of men, and that was a very reckless act on Omar's part. Of course, a lot of times we celebrate that, but that in itself is not really the best example of courage. It's courageous, yes, but it's actually at the point of recklessness. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, his decision, okay, I'm actually going to follow this man, right? He doesn't have any followers yet. I'm amongst the elite, and I'm going to abandon my people, my position, my influence. I'm going to follow him. Even Abu Bakr's decision to stay behind with the Prophet and travel with him to Medina, right? Knowing that the Prophet actually was a hunted man. The Meccans had already made the decision that, we're going to get together, we're going to kill Muhammad. We're going to kill him, we're going to come together. All of us, all the tribes are going to band together, we're going to all stab him. We're going to stab him at once, so that way, all of us carry the burden, and this one tribe, his tribe actually won't have a chance to do anything, right? And Abu Bakr, he stayed with him, right? He traveled with him. He was in the cave with him. And there's so many other examples of this, but courage fundamentally is the ability to face one's fear, and face danger, to actually confront danger. So if you don't have some fear, it's not courage. It's not courage. You have to have some level of fear, right? If you don't have fear, then there's probably something going wrong with you, right? So, but then of course the other extreme is the extreme of cowardice, where you just decide, you know what, I just can't do it. But you should, it's for your own good. It's actually for your own good. And we find actually throughout the Quran, there are a number of verses that that actually threaten the believers from the Sahaba at the time, that if they don't, for instance, spend their money in the way of God, then God is going to turn away from them and replace them with another people who won't be like them, right? Because the wealth that he was asking them to pay was actually for their own defense. Right. وَأَنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى تَهْلُكَةٍ, and spend in the way of Allah, and do not throw yourselves into destruction by your own hands. Right? Spend in the way of God. Right? Meaning, spend in your own self-defense. Right? Because if you don't, you're going to be destroyed. Right? So if you decided that, my wealth is more important than my life, or at least people who do those things probably don't think that that's the case at the time, fundamentally, but that's really the choice that they're making, then that is an act of cowardice, so you need to support certain types of efforts. So courage, temperance, justice, wisdom, and, so just a lot of this is a summary of things we've covered. And so I wanted to end with just a couple of reading just some statements from Ghazali from one of his books, al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din. And so here he's just talking about the lust, or the vice of lust, sharihu ta'am. And so he said, هو من الأمهات العظيمة الضرر في الدين لأن المعدة ينبوع الشهوات. So he says lust, or in this case will be gluttony. Gluttony. He said it is one of the most destructive, most harmful of all of the vices as relates to one's religiosity, because the stomach is the fountainhead, or the source of all of the lusts, of all desires. إذ منها تتشعب شهوة الفرج, and from it the lust itself results, right? Or the desire that comes from one's loins, it results. So it starts with the stomach and then moves to one's loins. ثم إذا غلب شهوة المأكول والمنكوح انشعب منها شهوة وهي حب المال. And then once the lust for, or the desire for food and for sexual intercourse takes over a person, then another lust develops, and this is called, or another desire develops, which is called the love of wealth. In this case, we call it greed. إذ لا يتوصل إلى قضاء شهوتين إلا به. And that is because it is one is not able to fulfill or gratify the other two desires without it, right? So without wealth. So my loins, my stomach. So my stomach first, then my loins, and then I realize, in order for me to gratify it once again, I need wealth, right? I need wealth to get food, and then I need wealth to get married, for instance, right? Or if people are into other types of things, and they may buy sex, things like that. So people require wealth in order for them to fulfill those two desires. وَيَتَشَعَّبُ مِنْ شَهْوَةِ الْمَالِ شَهْوَةُ الْجَاهِ. And then from the desire for wealth, or from greed, you get the desire for status. إِذْ يَعْصُرُ كَسْبَ الْمَالِ دُونَهُ. Because it becomes difficult to actually earn wealth without it. You have to have status in order to earn wealth. So status could be something as small as just having a job. There's a certain level of status involved with that, being an entrepreneur, right? But then also it becomes, you can become like the mayor or the president. You can become the, a big, you can become a district attorney, become the governor, whatever, status, you become a famous person, right? Entertainer, whatever. So status, once you have status, and actually status becomes actually more desirable than wealth at a certain level, at a certain point. So in fame and fortune, right? That oftentimes you can do more with fame than you can do with fortune, or through your fame you get fortune. So and there are a lot of people who have fortune and they can care less about fame, you know. And but it's said that the desire for status is the last of the different vices to leave the heart of the murid, of the traveler, of the person who's on this journey. Right, and then he said, ثُمَّ عِنْدَ حُصُولِ الْمَالِ وَالْجَاهِ وَطَلَبِهِمَا تَزْدَحِمُ الْآفَاتُ كُلُّهَا. And then once one acquires wealth, status, and seeks both of them, seeks the two of them, all of the other vices, they clash, they come together and clash with one another. كَالْكِبْرِ وَالرِّيَاء, such as pride, ostentation, وَالْحَسَدِ وَالْحِقْدِ, and envy and resentment, وَالْعَدَاوَةِ بِغَيْرِهَا, and enmity as well as others. وَمَنْبَعُ جَمِيعِ ذَلِكَ البَّطْنِ, and the source of all of that is what? The stomach. فَلِهَذَا عَظَّمَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ أَمْرَ الْجُوعِ. And for this reason, the Prophet ﷺ, he magnified the affair of hunger, right? Of the affair of hunger. So sort of recommending for people to adopt an ethic of hunger. And in one hadith, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم ما ملأ ابن آدم وعاء شر من بطنه. It said, the Prophet says in one hadith that the son of Adam does not fill a container more evil than his stomach. حسب ابن آدم لقيمات يقمن صلبه. Said it is sufficient for the son of Adam to have a number of morsels by which he will be able to straighten out his back. وإن كان لا محالة فثلث لطعامه وثلث لشرابه وثلث لنفسه. But if a person finds no way around it, then let 1/3 be for food, 1/3 for drink, and 1/3 for breathing. In another hadith, he says, إن الشيطان ليجري من ابن آدم مجرى الدم. The Satan runs in the bloodstream of the son of Adam. And so I wanted to read to you. He actually has a section here, and he talks about the benefits of hunger, and he mentions up to 7 benefits. And I just want to read those benefits that come. So he says, وَلَا يَخْفَى أَنَّ مَفْتَاحَ السَّعَادَةِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. He said, it is unhidden, or it is well known that the key to happiness is knowledge. The key to happiness is knowledge. وَلَا تُنَارُ إِلَّا بِصَفَاءِ الْقَلْبِ وَتَنَوُّرِهِ. And that, or happiness, can only be achieved by purity of heart and its illumination. فَلِذَلِكَ كَانَ جُوعُ قَرْعَ بَابِ الْجَنَّةِ. For this reason, hunger has become the way, or the thing which knocks at the gates of paradise. الثانية, I'm sorry, actually that was underneath the first one. I didn't read the first one. So he goes on, if we go back, he says, لعلك تشتهي أن تعلم السر في تعظيم الجوع ووجه مناسبته للطريق الآخرة. Said, maybe you would like to know the secret regarding the magnification of hunger and the way that is connected with the path to the hereafter. فاعلم أن له فوائد كثيرة. One should know that it has a number of benefits. ولكن يرجع أصولها إلى 7. Rather, the foundations upon which it is built are 7. إحداها صفاء القلب. So the first of them is purity of heart, ونفاذ البصيرة, and the clearness of one's vision or sight. So basically, you're talking about your mind. It clears your mind. When you're hungry, it actually makes you sharper, your mind sharper. فَإِنَّ الشِّبْعَ يُورِثُ الْبَلَادَ. He said, so being full, being satiated, actually leads to stupidity, right? Leads dim-wittedness, and balada. وَيُعْمِي الْقَلْبِ. And it also blinds the heart, right? It places a type of blindness upon the heart. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم من أجاع بطنه عظمت فكرته. And he relates a hadith attributed to the Prophet, where he supposedly said that whoever empties his stomach of food, then his thinking will be great. وَفَطِنَ قَلْبُهُ. And his heart will be more intelligent. Or kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that's the first one, that it clears the mind, that hunger clears the mind for study, for reflection, things like that. الثانية رقة القلب حتى يدرك به لذة المناجاة ويتأثر بالذكر والعبادة. So the second benefit is that it affects the mind to the point that it makes it possible for one to experience the sweetness of the divine communion with God. It helps you to experience the communion with God and to be affected by remembrance and worship, the remembrance of God and worship. قال الجنيد رحمه الله ونفعنا به يجعل أحدكم بينه وبين الله تعالى مخلاة من الطعام يريد أن يجد حلاوة المناجاة لله تعالى. I'll leave that out just because of the sake of time. But basically the whole idea, the second point is that it makes it easier for a person to commune with God. The first reason, that it clears the mind for thought and for study. Second, that it helps one to clear the mind, make it easier for one to commune with God and to benefit from one's devotion. الثالثة ذل النفس وزوال البطر والطغيان منها. The third is that hunger leads to a suppression or subjugation of the soul. Subjugates the ego and keeps it from committing excess. فَلَا تُكْسَرُ النَّفْسُ بِشَيْءٍ كَالْجُوعِ. Because the nafs or the ego or the self is not broken by anything better than hunger. وَتَغْيَانُ دَاعٍ إِلَى الْغَفْلَةِ عَنِ اللَّهِ. And excess, it actually invites one to be heedless of God. وَهُوَ بَابُ جَحِيمُ وَالشَّقَاوَةِ. And that in itself is the door to hell and to wretchedness. وَالْجُوعُ إِغْلَاقٌ لِهَذَا الْبَابِ. Hunger itself, on the other hand, it closes this door. وفي إغلاق باب الشقاوة فتح باب السعادة. And in closing the door to wretchedness or sadness is the opening of the door to happiness. So again, sadness, happiness. Sa'ada and shaqawa. So become, so sadness becomes wretchedness and sa'ada becomes good fortune. So basically, the third one is that it helps one to manage the soul, manage the nafs. Because you're hungry, you're weak. Weakens the body, right? You don't really want to do a lot of things, You really don't have the time to really be sitting around thinking about what other people are doing. I mean, at least you shouldn't, if you do it the right way. It weakens the body, and it really doesn't. You don't want to talk as much either about people or about anything. You don't want to move around and do too much as well. So that's number 3. The fourth, الرابعة أن البلاء من أبواب الجنة لأن فيه مشاهدة طعام العذاب وبه يعظم الخوف من عذاب الآخرة. So the fourth reason he says is that because since hunger is a type of tribulation from God, it becomes a way of coming into the gates of paradise, and that is by witnessing or experiencing a taste of punishment. So you're experiencing a taste, what it tastes like to be punished through hunger, that actually encourages one to pursue good things and pursue paradise. So that's fundamentally what he's implying here. وَبِهِ يَعْظَمُ الْخَوْفُ مِنْ عَذَابِ الْآخِرَةِ. So your fear of the punishment in the afterlife becomes more significant. وَلَا يَقْدِرُ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يُعَذِّبَ نَفْسَهُ بِشَيْءٍ كَالْجُوعِ. And no person is able to punish himself with anything better than through hunger. فإنه لا يحتاج فيه إلى تكلف. Because you don't require any sustenance, any sort of you don't require any you don't have to pay anything for it. You have to pay anything to be hungry. وترتبع فيها فوائد أخرى. And there are a number of other benefits connected with it. فيكون مشاهدا بلاء الله تعالى على الدوام. So when you're hungry, you are constantly witnessing God's tribulation. وَذَلِكَ يَدْعُ إِلَى الرَّحْمَةِ وَإِطْعَامِ. And that in itself, it invites one to be merciful and to feed others. وَالشَّبْعَانُ فِي غَفْلَةٍ عَنْ أَلَمِ الْجَائِعِ. Whereas the person who's full is completely heedless to the pains of the hungry person. Right? So when you're hungry, you also realize other people are hungry. So there's a fourth, that it makes a person pursue paradise in light of reflecting upon God's punishment, since hunger itself is a type of punishment. خامسة, the fifth one, وهي من كبار فوائد كسر سائر الشهوات التي هي منابع المعاصي. So the fifth benefit is that it is a way to break all the other desires, which happen, whereas it itself is, which are the source of all the other sins. So say it originates in the stomach. So if I gain control of my stomach, then it should be easier for me to control everything else. So I should be able to control my tongue, control my eye, control what I listen to, control where I go on my feet, control my hands, control what I do with my genitals. So it becomes one of those things. So it helps one to break one's desires and gain mastery over one's self. And then, so that's 5. And then 6, he says, السادسة خفة البدن للتهجد والعبادة وزوال النوم المانع من العبادة. That it makes the body feel invigorated or light, in order to get up and pray at night and perform acts of worship, and to remove the state of sleep, which actually prevents one from worshiping. Right. So if your stomach is light and you have food in your stomach, it's easy to get up and pray. Right. If you eat a big meal before you go to sleep, it's going to be harder to get up and pray. فإن رأس مال سعادة العمر. So he said the capital of happiness is life. Your life itself is a type of capital that you have in order to achieve happiness. وَالنَّوْمُ يَنْقُصُ الْعُمر. And sleep itself, it reduces your lifespan. إذ يمنع من العبادة, since it prevents you from worship. وأصله كثرة الأكل. But the reason for it is because you eat too much. And then the seventh of these benefits, the last of them, he says, خفة المؤنة وإمكان قناعة بقليل من الدنيا. It says that hunger, a benefit of hunger is that it removes one's, it reduces the amount of expenditures that one has. خفة المؤنة وإمكان قناعة بقليل من الدنيا. And it actually makes it possible for one to be content with only having a small amount of this world. وإمكان إيثار الفقر. And also makes it possible for one to prefer even poverty. فإن من قنع تخلص من شره بطنه. So because the person who is content is freed from one's gluttony. وَلَمْ يَفْتَقِرْ إِلَى مَالٍ كَثِيرٍ. And that person also has no need to a lot of wealth. فَيَسْقُطُ عَنْهُ أَكْثَرُ هُمُومِ الدُّنْيَا. And once you have only a very small number of needs, then all the anxieties from this world are removed from you, or the majority of anxieties that one has in the world are removed from you. فَمَهْمَا أَرَادَ أَنْ يَسْتَقْرِضَ لِقَضَاءِ شَهْوَةِ الْبَطَنِ اسْتَقْرَضَ مِنْ نَفْسِهِ. So whenever one wants to get a loan in order to fulfill or gratify one's one's lust, or one's any type of desire you have, and in particular the desire of the stomach, then you'll just simply take a loan from yourself. You get a good way to say it. So it says that it's like, well, you don't have that desire, So if I want a loan, I don't need this thing, so I'll take a loan from my nafs. وَتَرَكَ شَهْوَتَهُ. And that is by abandoning your lust. كان إذا قيل إبراهيم بن أدهم رحمه الله تعالى إنه غال في شيء إنه غال قال أرخصوه بالترك. So Ibrahim ibn Adham, one of our sages, it says that anytime it was said to him, people came to him complaining about the market prices of things, and they say, well, it's too expensive now, it's high, prices are high. He would say to them, أرخصوه بالترك. He said, then reduce this price, reduce it, make it cheap by abandoning it. Just make it cheap, just don't get it. That's how you make the price, reduce this price. So with that, we'll conclude. And inshallah, next Saturday, Imam Zayd, he'll be here with you, inshallah, for the final session. And he'll choose what he wants to speak about when that particular day comes, inshallah. So if there are any questions, I'd like to open up the floor right now. If not, then that's also a good thing too. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. All right, okay. Jazakumullah khairah. Appreciate everyone coming out, and hopefully see you next semester, Living Links. And hopefully there's some benefit, a lot of benefit that comes from this, and you're able to take it right away and implement it right away in your life, in your lives, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Wa subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين. السلام عليكم.